Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Today, we're tackling Abraham Verghese's The Covenant of Water, and let me tell you, this book is huge-y.
It is.
Luckily, we have this fantastic podcast episode to help us break it down.
It really added a lot of depth, even if you haven't read the book yet.
Absolutely. So where should we even start with a book this epic?
Well, the podcast hosts were really struck by the setting, early 20th century Kerala, India.
Kerala, huh? So we're not just talking like generic India.
Not at all. Verghese brings Kerala to life. It's not just a backdrop, it's practically a character.
Okay, I've heard that before, setting as a character, but how does Verghese actually pull that off?
He does it through water. Kerala is a place of lush landscapes, intricate waterways, constant rain, monsoons. The sea is always there.
The water's everywhere.
Exactly. And Verghese describes it so vividly that it becomes this force that connects and isolates people, just like the secrets within the family at the heart of the story.
So it's almost like the water itself has a personality, reflecting the family's dynamics. That's a great way to put it. The podcast hosts asked how this watery setting reflects the flow of memory and tradition, and I think you're right on the mark.
Like, the past is always present, shaping the present, just like the water shapes the land.
Exactly. It's both life-giving and destructive, mysterious and ever-present, just like the past can be.
That makes me think about the family's mysterious condition that gets passed down through generations. It's not just a medical mystery, right?
Right. The podcast host saw it as a metaphor for all the baggage families carry: secrets, traumas, expectations, the things we inherit whether we want to or not.
It's fascinating how each generation deals with it differently.
It is. It really makes you think about how the times we live in shape how we understand things like illness and fate.
Definitely. But could we get a bit more specific? How does this condition actually show up in the story? Otherwise, it's kind of hard to grasp what it really means.
Sure. The podcast mentioned how some family members experience seizures near water, while others are inexplicably drawn to it.
So, like a fear versus a fascination.
Exactly. But it's less about the specific symptoms and more about what it represents, this inherited burden that shapes their lives and relationships.
It forces them to confront their fears, desires, and ultimately their family's legacy.
You got it. And through that, Verghese explores themes of resilience and how the past can have a lasting impact.
Okay, now it's clicking. It's like the condition itself is a kind of inheritance, shaping how they see themselves and their place in the world.
Absolutely. The podcast host even asked if it's a curse or something else. I think it's both. You know, it's a weight they carry, but it also binds them together.
Which brings us back to that idea of water connecting and isolating. It's both life-giving and potentially dangerous, just like family ties can be.
The podcast hosts really emphasize that duality, how water is a source of renewal, but also capable of immense destruction.
Like the monsoon rains that bring life back to the land, but can also cause devastating floods.
Exactly. It's a powerful metaphor for the complexities of life itself, the good and the bad, the beauty and the pain.
So how does this all connect back to the family's legacy? We've got water, we've got this condition, but how does it all weave together?
Well, think about how rivers carry silt and debris downstream. Similarly, the family carries its history, the joys, sorrows, and secrets through time.
It's like the water is a physical manifestation of their history, shaping the landscape just like their past shapes their present.
Exactly. And just like with a river, you can't always control where the current takes you, but you can learn to navigate it.
Which makes me think we all inherit something from our families, whether we realize it or not: traditions, values, anxieties.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the novel asks, what do we do with that inheritance? Do we let it define us? Or do we find a way to shape it into something new?
The podcast host posed a question about how the novel views healing, both personal and communal. And it seems like that's at the heart of what Verghese is exploring.
It is, and I think that's what makes the book so powerful. It's not just about this one family, it's about how we all grapple with the past to create our own futures.
It's a reminder that everyone's carrying something, and how we choose to deal with it makes all the difference.
Right. And sometimes acknowledging that weight is the first step to finding the way to move forward.
This is getting pretty deep. And speaking of deep, I'm curious to explore how water specifically becomes almost like a character in the novel. We've touched on it, but how does Verghese make that more than just a poetic idea?
Well, he uses these incredibly vivid images. For example, the podcast hosts mentioned a scene where a character dives into a well, and the feeling of being enveloped by the water is both terrifying and strangely comforting.
Whoa, I can almost feel that. It's like the water has its own moods and intentions.
Exactly. It's a living presence, not just a substance. And that's what makes the water metaphor so powerful.
Wow, that's really resonating with me. It sounds like Verghese is trying to show how water is more than just a physical thing. It's a force that shapes lives and destinies.
Precisely. And it's constantly changing, just like the lives of the characters in the story.
It makes me wonder if Verghese's writing about water is connected to his own personal experiences, or maybe even some cultural beliefs about water in India.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure about his personal life, but in many cultures, water does hold a lot of symbolic significance, like cleansing or purification or rebirth.
So when a character interacts with water in the novel, it's not just a mundane act, it's loaded with deeper meaning.
You got it. And all those layers of meaning add to the richness of the covenant of water.
This is making me want to dive right into the book. But before we get too swept away by the current, I think it's time we explore another major theme: legacy and the human spirit. The podcast hosts highlighted how the Covenant of Water goes beyond just a family saga. It's a story about survival, love, and perseverance. They were really moved by how the novel portrays hope and renewal. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Verghese doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff: loss, illness, betrayal. But amidst all that pain, there's this enduring sense of hope.
The characters find strength in each other, in their shared history, even when it's painful.
Exactly. The podcast hosts mentioned a scene where the family gathers by the river to tell stories about their ancestors. It's a ritual that connects them to their past and gives them strength to face the future. It's beautiful.
It's like those stories are anchors, reminding them of who they are and where they come from.
And that sense of belonging, that connection to something bigger than themselves, fuels their spirit, even when things get tough.
Which reminds me, family stories can be both a burden and a blessing. They carry the weight of the past, but also remind us we're part of something larger than ourselves.
It's a beautiful paradox, isn't it? And the Covenant of Water captures that so well.
Absolutely. And I think that's why this book resonates so deeply. It reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles. We all inherit things, good and bad, and it's about finding a way to live with them, to make something meaningful out of them.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the ultimate message of hope and resilience that Verghese offers. Even when life throws its worst at you, there's still beauty to be found, strength to be drawn from, and a future to be shaped.
And on that note, I think it's time for a quick pause. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into Verghese's watery world and see how it all connects to the themes of legacy, healing, and the enduring human spirit. Stay with us. And we're back, diving deeper into the Covenant of Water.
You know, before the break, we were talking about how Verghese uses these amazing images to bring the water to life.
Like it's almost a character itself.
Exactly. Were there any examples from the podcast episode that really stuck with you?
Let me think. Oh, I remember they talked about a scene where a character's caught in a monsoon downpour,
Yes.
and Verghese describes the rain as like a curtain of water.
Oh, I remember that.
And it creates this feeling of being overwhelmed, but also kind of protected at the same time.
It's like the water is both gentle and fierce, life-giving and destructive, all at once.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And that duality seems so central to the whole book.
It is. The podcast host talked about how water reflects the flow of memory and tradition, but I think it also shows how we're all shaped by things we can't control.
Like the characters in the book are shaped by the water that's all around them.
Precisely. And it's a constant reminder that life is full of forces that are bigger than us.
That makes me think about how the family's history is so intertwined with those Kerala waterways.
Right. Their lives are shaped by the water, both literally and metaphorically.
The podcast host even mentioned how some family members have this almost mystical connection to the water.
Oh yeah, like the grandmother who can sense storms coming.
And that young boy who can somehow find underground springs.
It's like the water holds secrets about their past, their future, maybe even the condition.
It's as if the water's trying to tell them something.
I love that idea. And it connects to that bigger question of how we grapple with our legacies, you know.
Like we all inherit this set of stories and experiences.
But we had to figure out what it all means.
And how we carry it forward.
Exactly. It makes me think about that question the podcast host asked about healing.
Personal and communal healing, right?
Yeah. Do you think the water plays a role in that?
I think so. Remember how we were talking about water being both destructive and renewing?
Oh, for sure.
It's like a cleansing force,
It can wash away the pain of the past.
but it can also leave scars.
So it's not about erasing the past completely,
It's about learning to live with it.
to integrate it into who you are.
And I think the water in the covenant of water is this constant reminder of that process.
The characters are always navigating the ebb and flow of their history, just like you're navigating the literal waterways of Kerala.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's like they're learning to swim in the currents of their own lives.
And just like learning to swim, it takes practice, resilience,
Yeah.
and a willingness to get back up when you get knocked down.
Which brings us back to that theme of the human spirit,
That enduring strength,
despite all the hardship they face.
the loss, the illness, that mysterious condition,
The characters keep pushing forward
they find ways to love, to hope.
to create meaning in their lives.
The podcast hosts were really touched by how the characters find strength in their shared history.
Even when that history is painful.
There's that scene where they gather by the river to tell stories about their ancestors.
Oh, yeah, that was a powerful moment.
It's a ritual that connects them to their past, but it also gives them strength to face the future.
It makes me think about how family stories can be both things a burden and a blessing.
It's true, they carry the weight of the past, but they also remind us that we're part of something bigger.
Like we're not alone.
Exactly. And that sense of belonging, that connection to something beyond ourselves, is what fuels the human spirit.
Even when we're facing really tough challenges.
It's like those stories become life rafts.
Keeping them afloat when the currents get rough.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights how we need each other, we need our families, our communities, to help us navigate those currents.
And sometimes we need a good book to remind us of that, right?
Definitely.
I'm feeling a real connection to my own family history after diving into the Covenant of Water.
Me too. It's amazing how a story can do that, take you to another place, another time, but also make you reflect on your own life.
It's like we're on that river journey with the characters, experiencing it all alongside them.
And just like a river journey, there are those calm, beautiful moments, but also unexpected twists and turns.
Speaking of twists and turns, I'm curious to explore that whole faith and spirituality element a bit more.
Yeah, we touched on it before, but there's definitely more to uncover there.
It feels especially relevant after talking about the water metaphor.
It does. Water and spirituality are so often connected.
So are you ready to dive into those deeper waters?
I'm ready if you are.
Let's do it. We'll explore how faith, science, and the human condition intertwine in the Covenant of Water when we come back after a quick break.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We're about to explore how faith and spirituality play into the covenant of water. It's funny, right after we started talking about the water metaphor, I kept thinking about how water is often linked to spiritual things.
Totally, like cleansing rituals and baptism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to see how Verghese brings those ideas into the novel.
Me too. Especially when it comes to the family's condition.
Right. Like, do they see it as some kind of divine punishment or a test of their faith?
Or maybe even a blessing in disguise.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought.
Well, the podcast episode touched on how Verghese portrays a variety of faith traditions, not just one dogma.
Oh, that's right. They mentioned Hindus, Christians.
And even characters who blend different beliefs.
Which makes sense, right? We're talking about India, a place with such rich spiritual diversity.
It's not just about one right way to believe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So naturally, how they respond to the condition varies too.
It's like even within the same family, people experience faith so differently.
Absolutely. And that makes the story even more relatable,
For sure.
Yeah.
But could you give an example? Like, how does this actually play out in the novel?
Sure, the podcast host talked about Big Amachi, the grandmother, who turns to prayer and traditional remedies when dealing with condition.
That's beautiful. It sounds like her faith is a real source of comfort.
It is, and it connects her to her ancestors, to her heritage.
But that doesn't mean everyone finds that same peace, right?
Right? They also talked about a younger character who really struggles with his faith.
Like he doubts.
Yeah, especially when he's confronted with suffering.
That must be so difficult to have your faith shaken like that.
It is. It's like the condition forces him to re-examine everything he thought he believed.
It makes me wonder about Verghese himself. As a doctor, he must have seen a lot of suffering.
Oh, definitely.
And then to explore those same themes through his writing.
It's like he's searching for answers on multiple levels.
And maybe those answers aren't always clear-cut, Life is messy.
It is. And I think Verghese is more interested in exploring that complexity than offering easy solutions.
It sounds like he's asking us to sit with the questions, the unknowns.
Which, honestly, is more true to life, isn't it?
Totally. It's not like we always have all the answers.
We have moments of doubt, moments of questioning, alongside those moments of faith and certainty.
It's all part of being human.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes the covenant of water so compelling.
It embraces that messiness, that complexity.
And it reminds us that we're not alone in those struggles.
Speaking of struggles, I'm curious about that intersection of faith and science.
Oh yeah, Verghese being a physician adds another layer to that.
The podcast hosts mentioned how some characters seek out both medical treatment and spiritual practices.
It's like they're acknowledging the power of both.
So it's not an either-or situation.
Not at all. I think it's more about recognizing the limits of both.
Like, science can explain a lot,
But it can't solve everything.
and faith can bring comfort.
But it doesn't always provide concrete answers.
So what does that leave us with?
Well, I think it leaves us with that space in between.
Where the human spirit comes in.
Exactly. That capacity to keep searching, keep hoping, even when we don't have all the answers.
To keep believing that there's more to life than what we can see and explain.
Beautifully said. And I think the covenant of water encourages us to embrace that mystery, that unknown.
Wow, this has been such an incredible conversation. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of this book, but I've already gained so much.
Me too. It's amazing how a deep dive like this can open up so many new perspectives.
And those questions the podcast hosts posed, they're really sticking with me.
About how we make peace with the past, how we find healing.
And how we navigate the currents of our own lives, even when they get rough.
Those are questions that stay with you long after you finish the book.
And I think The Covenant of Water offers some valuable insights, even if the answers aren't always easy.
It's a story that challenges us to think deeply about our own lives, our own beliefs, our own relationships with the world around us.
And for that, I'm so grateful. If you haven't already, I highly recommend checking out The Covenant of Water. It's a truly unforgettable journey, and I have a feeling it will spark some fascinating conversations for you too.
It definitely will. And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more explorations, but until then, keep those conversations going and keep exploring the world around you.
See you next time.